That night the prince paid her so many compliments and singled her out so often to bestow his favors that Olga's head was turned. She tossed it proudly, and quite scorned the thought of the humble cottage which had given her shelter so long. The next day, when she had returned to her gown of tow, and was no longer a haughty court lady, but only Olga, the flax spinner's maiden, she repined at her lot. Frowning, she carried the water from the spring. Frowning, she gathered the cresses and plucked the woodland fruit. And when she sat all day by the spring, refusing to spread the linen on the grass to bleach, she was discontented with the old life of toil, and pouted crossly because duties called her when she wanted to do nothing but sit idly dreaming of the gay court scenes in which she had taken a bright brief part. The old flax spinner's fingers trembled as she spun, when she saw the frowns, for she had given of her heart's blood to buy happiness for this maiden she loved, and well she knew there can be no happiness where frowns abide. She felt that her years of sacrifice had been in vain, but when the oak wagged his head, she called back waveringly, "My little Olga will not be ungrateful and forgetful." That night outside the castle gate, Olga paused. She had forgotten the charm. The day's discontent had darkened her memory as storm clouds darken the sky. But she grasped her necklace imperiously. "Deck me at once," she cried in a haughty tone. "Clothe me more beautifully than mortal maid was ever clad before, so that I may find favor in the prince's sight and become the bride of the castle. I would that I were done for ever with the spindle and the distaff." But the moon went under a cloud, and the wind began to moan around the turrets. The black night hawks in the forest flapped their wings warningly, and the black bats flitted low around her head. "Obey me at once!" she cried angrily, stamping her foot and jerking at the necklace. But the string broke, and the beads went rolling away in the darkness in every direction and were lost, all but one, which she held clasped in her hand. Then Olga wept at the castle gate, wept outside in the night and the darkness, in her peasant's garb of tow. But after a while, through her sobbing, stole the answering sob of the night wind. "Hush," it seemed to say. "Shh. Never a heart can come to harm, if the lips but speak the old dame's charm." The voice of the night wind sounded so much like the voice of the old flax spinner that Olga was startled and looked around wonderingly. Then suddenly she seemed to see the thatched cottage and the bent form of the lonely old woman at the wheel. All the years in which the good dame had befriended her seemed to rise up in a row, and out of each one called 1,000 kindnesses as with one voice. "How canst thou forget us, Olga? We were done for love's sweet sake, and that alone." Then was Olga sorry and ashamed that she had been so proud and forgetful, and she wept again. The tears seemed to clear her vision, for now she saw plainly that through no power of her own could she wrest strange favors from fortune. Only the power of the old charm could make them hers. She remembered it then, and holding fast the one bead in her hand, she repeated humbly, "For love's sweet sake, in my hour of need, blossom and deck me, little seed." Lo, as the words left her lips, the moon shone out from behind the clouds above the dark forest. There was a fragrance of lilies all about, and a gossamer gown floated around her, whiter than the whiteness of the fairest lily. It was fine like the finest lace the frost elves weave, and softer than the softest ermine of the snow. On her long golden hair gleamed a coronet of pearls. So beautiful, so dazzling was she as she entered the castle door, that the prince came down to meet her, and kneeling, kissed her hand and claimed her as his bride. Then came the bishop in his mitre, and led her to the throne, and before them all the flax spinner's maiden was married to the prince, and became the Princess Olga. Then, until the 7 days and 7 nights were done, the revels lasted in the castle. and in the merriment the old flax spinner was again forgotten. Her kindness of the past, her loneliness in the present, had no part in the thoughts of the Princess Olga. All night the old oak, tapping on the thatch, called down, "Thou'rt forgotten, thou'rt forgotten." But the beads that had rolled away in the darkness buried themselves in the earth and took root, and sprang up, as the old woman knew they would do. There at the castle gate they bloomed, a strange, strange flower, for on every stem hung a row of little bleeding hearts. One day the Princess Olga, seeing them from her window, went down to them in wonderment. "What do you hear?" she cried, for in her forest life she'd learned all speech of bird and beast and plant. "We bloom for love's sweet sake," they answered. "We have sprung from the old flax spinner's gift, the necklace thou didst break and scatter. From her heart's best blood she gave it, and her heart still bleeds to think she is forgotten." Then they began to tell the story of the old dame's sacrifices, all the 70 times 7 that she had made for the sake of the maiden, and Olga grieved, as she listened, that she could have been so ungrateful. Then she brought the prince to hear the story of the strange, strange flowers, and when he had heard, together they went to the lowly cottage and fetched the old flax spinner to the castle, there to live out all her days in ease and contentment. "See now," she whispered to the oak at parting, but sturdily he held his ground, persisting, "Thou wouldst have been forgotten, save for that miracle of bloom." And still the flower we call Bleeding Heart blooms on by cottage walls and castle gardens, to waken all the world to grateful memories, and ever it doth bring to mind the lonely hearts that bleed because they are forgotten, and all they sacrificed for love's sweet sake to give us happiness.